Welcome back to another Holdfast Nations of War SDK tutorial video. In this video we'll be going over how to set up the Army Siege game mode. So let's get started with Army Siege. So let's enable it again by clicking on it and then clicking on the tag up here. So now that's enabled, we can actually go into the Army Siege hierarchy. So as you see, we have player spawn areas and also spawn section capture points. How Siege works is you have capture points and then spawn areas linked to those capture points. So let's first go into player spawn areas. And as you see, we have 3 different spawn sections. 2 of them are for the defenders, which are the planes and also the fort spawn sections, and then one of them is for the attackers. So let's first do the attacking spawn section. So let's select that, and then we can move it up. And this is a very similar setup to how you do the Army Assault game mode and also Army Battlefield. So I'm just going to place it behind this hill for the Army Siege game mode. And then we're going to lower them a little bit. Okay, so that's good. And that's really all you need to do. So if we want to rename this, because I don't want it to be called North Camp, I want it to be called Hill Camp. So it's very simple to do. I'm going to first rename it in the hierarchy over here, so I can keep track of it. So let's call it Hill Spawn. And then over on the inspector, when we have it selected, we're going to rename the section name to Hill Spawn. And the section type is a land spawn section, and the spawn subtype is a base spawn. And then you can set the allowed classes. I'm going to leave them as default though, because I don't want to edit them. And then here you can also change if it's a rowboat spawn and if you allow auto respawn and stuff like that. I recommend just leaving that as default though. So now the attacking spawn is done, we can do the defenders spawn sections. So let's find some spawn areas we want. So I want some on top of this hill because this is going to be one of the capture points. So let's call this next section here, the spawn section 4. Let's rename this to the tree hill. And then we're going to rename it in the section name to tree hill. And it's not going to be a base spawn, it's going to be a camp. Now the way the defending spawns work is not through nodes, it's through a collider. So to get to that we need to go to the drop down, go to the spawn section node, and then we're just going to move it along and bring it up. And as you can see, there's a collider here, and the way this works, it finds the closest ground and it will spawn you on that ground. So let's make it a little bit wider because we have more room here. So we can just press R and we're just going to make it wider by simply scaling it like that. So now people will spawn inside of this boxed area. Okay, and now let's say we want to have another spawn section for another capture point, which is going to be on this hill here. So let's rename this to Mega Hill. There we go. And we're going to do the same in the inspector. And it's going to be a ship, because why not? And then we're going to go to the spawn section node again and move it over here. So let's do that. Put it there. Lower it down a little bit. And then we'll make it nice and wide. Okay. So we've done that. Now we need to actually give the spawn section capture points. So we can close down the player spawn area hierarchy now and go over to the spawn section capture points. And as you see, we have 2 capture points that are currently linked to these different spawn sections we've made. So the fort one needs to be renamed. So let's rename that to Tree Hill. And then we can just simply move it up from under the ground and move it over to the tree. And there we go. So let's just make sure it is somewhat in the ground so it looks realistic. And then we can head over to the capture point plane one and rename that to the Mega Hill. And then let's also drag that over here. Okay, so now we have 2 capture points set up, and that will work. If you play in game now, that will work perfectly. But let's say we wanted to add a 3rd capture point. This is where it gets a little bit more advanced. So the first thing we need to do is select the capture point here, or any of the capture points, and then duplicate it. And then we need to give it an identifier. So I suggest giving it an identifier of 4, And the reason we don't do 3 is because the spawn section for the attackers has an identifier of 3, and that will conflict with the spawn section for this capture flag if we name it 3. So just give it 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, any number that isn't already used by a capture point, and then we're just going to move it over up here to the top of the hill. So let's say we wanted to have a capture point here. So we'll move that there. Okay, and now we need to give it a spawn point. So to do that, we just need to go to the player spawn areas and duplicate any of these. Let's go for the mega hill one because it's right next to us. And then give it the same identifier as the capture point. So let's give it 4. Okay, and then we're going to raise it so it's up here right on top of the hill as well as the capture point, and then we'll move it in a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now that capture point will work. Let's change the icon to a field. Okay, so that is good. So let's quickly rename these spawn sections. So let's call them the Epic Hill, and then let's also rename the capture point to Epic Hill. Okay, and I need to actually rename it in the inspector. Okay, cool. So now another thing we need to do is make sure people can't capture it when they're standing down here. We want them to be actually on top of the hill. Right now if they're here, they'll be able to capture it because there's no height bounds. So to set height bounds, you just select the capture point, and then where it says height bounds min max, you can start moving the sliders. So we want the maximum height people can capture it to be at the top. No one's really going to go that high anyway. And then the minimum height, we want it to be whatever is kind of closest to the top of the hill, which I think is about here. So they need to be standing about here to capture it. If they're any lower than this, they won't be able to capture it. So this is useful if you're making a fort and you don't want people to be able to capture it from below the room. So there's one more thing now we need to do, and that's actually link this spawn section to the capture point, because right now if we go to the Epic Hill, you'll see that the Tree Hill spawn section is currently linked to this capture point. So people will spawn down there if they capture this, but we don't want that. So to fix this, all we do is left click on this spawn section and drag it into the spawn section reference up here, and then now people will spawn on the Epic Hill. So one more thing we need to do with the Army Siege point that we've just made is actually add it to the Army Siege game mode. So right now if you load into the game, this will be a neutral capture point and it will bug out the game quite a lot. So we actually need to set it as a capturable point. So to do this we need to select the Army Siege hierarchy, and then over here you'll see that we have some required to win capture points, and then defender spawn section, attacking spawn sections and stuff like that. So let's click on the required to win capture point drop down. And if we want this Epic Hill to be a required to win point, we just need to click on the size of the elements here and click on 2 to add a new element, and then just drag in the Epic Hill capture point. So now that means they have to capture this one to make sure that they win. The next thing we have secondary capture points. So these are just other capture points that they can capture if they want to. Obviously we don't have any, so we're just going to leave that. And then we have attacking spawn sections. So we have the hill spawn and then also the defenders spawn sections. So in this is just where the attackers are spawning. So if you make a second attacking spawn section, you need to increase this to 2 and then drag that in, but we obviously haven't done that, so let's leave that as 1. And then for the defender spawn section, this is where we need to add in our third one. So let's quickly do that, and then we're going to add in the spawn section for the Epic Hill. And there we go. And then that is how you set up the Siege capture points.